Comment where you're watching from today, because this story about an airport security encounter is going to leave you speechless. When a group of TSA agents detained a seemingly ordinary passenger without realizing who he was, they had no idea they were about to face one of the most dramatic confrontations in recent airport history. It was a crisp autumn morning at Cincinnati/Northern Kentucky International Airport, where the usual buzz of travelers filled the terminal. The air carried the familiar scent of coffee from nearby cafes and the sound of rolling luggage across polished floors. Among the crowds, J.D. Vance moved quietly through the terminal, dressed in a simple navy blazer and khakis, looking more like a college professor than a prominent political figure. The security checkpoint ahead was staffed by several TSA agents, including Michael Thompson, a veteran officer known for his strict adherence to protocol, and Sandra Martinez, a newly appointed supervisor eager to prove herself. The line moved steadily as passengers shuffled through the familiar dance of removing shoes, belts, and electronics. As Vance approached the checkpoint, he maintained the same unassuming demeanor that had characterized his entire journey. He placed his bags on the conveyor belt and waited patiently, just like any other traveler. But something about his calm demeanor caught Thompson's attention. In his 15 years of service, Thompson had developed what he called a sixth sense for spotting potential security concerns. "Sir, please step aside for additional screening," Thompson called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made similar requests thousands of times before. Vance complied without protest, though a slight furrow appeared on his brow. He understood the importance of security procedures, having written extensively about institutional trust and public service. Sandra Martinez approached, clipboard in hand. "Sir, there seems to be an irregularity with your screening results." Her tone was professional but carried an edge of suspicion that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "We'll need to conduct a more thorough investigation." What happened next would become a lesson in power dynamics, institutional overreach, and the dangerous territory of unchecked authority. As Vance was led to a small, windowless room off the main terminal, other passengers began to take notice. Among them was Barbara Williams, a retired judge who recognized Vance immediately but chose to observe the situation unfold. Inside the secondary screening room, Thompson and Martinez were joined by Richard Anderson, the head of airport security. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as they began their questioning. "Sir, can you explain the purpose of your travel today?" Anderson asked, his eyes fixed on a computer screen displaying Vance's identification details. "I'm heading to Washington for a series of meetings," Vance replied calmly. "Is there a specific concern I can address?" His response was measured, showing no signs of the frustration that might be expected in such a situation. Martinez exchanged glances with Thompson before continuing. "We've flagged some inconsistencies in your documentation. Your ID shows government clearance, but there's no advance notice of your travel in our system." The implication was clear. They suspected something was amiss with his credentials. What the security team didn't realize was that their routine screening was about to expose a deeper issue within the airport's security protocols. As they continued their questioning, Jennifer Clark, another TSA agent who had just started her shift, entered the room with a concerned expression. "Mr. Anderson, sir, I think there's something you should know," Clark began, but Anderson raised his hand to silence her. His focus remained on Vance, who sat quietly, his expression unchanged despite the mounting tension in the room. "Sir, we take security very seriously here," Anderson continued, his voice carrying a hint of condescension. "Regardless of who someone claims to be, our protocols are non-negotiable." The irony of his statement would soon become apparent to everyone in the room. Outside, word began to spread through the terminal. Robert Harris, a local news reporter waiting for his flight, caught wind of the situation and began taking notes. The story was developing into something far more significant than a routine security check. Back in the screening room, Vance finally spoke up. "I understand and respect your procedures," he began, his voice carrying the same measured tone he'd used throughout his public service career. "However, I believe there's been a misunderstanding that could be easily cleared up with a simple phone call." Thompson scoffed. "Sir, everyone has a story. Everyone knows someone. That's not how this works." His words would come back to haunt him within the hour. The situation reached a turning point when Elizabeth Moore, the airport's director of operations, burst into the room. Her face showed a mix of concern and embarrassment as she whispered something to Anderson. The color drained from his face as he realized the magnitude of their error. "Mr. Vance, Anderson began, but Vance raised his hand gently. "Before you continue," Vance interrupted, his voice still calm but now carrying an undeniable authority, "I'd like to discuss the broader implications of what's happened here today. Not because of who I am, but because of what this reveals about our security protocols and how they're implemented." The room fell silent. Barbara Williams, who had managed to position herself near the door, couldn't help but smile. She'd witnessed similar scenes throughout her judicial career, moments when power dynamics shifted dramatically, revealing the true nature of institutional relationships. What unfolded next would become a masterclass in leadership and grace under pressure. Instead of leveraging his position to embarrass the security team, Vance turned the incident into a constructive dialogue about airport security procedures, institutional accountability, and the balance between authority and respect. "Your job is essential," Vance acknowledged, addressing the entire security team. "But today's incident highlights some concerning issues in how that authority is exercised." His words carried the weight of someone who understood both sides of the equation, the need for security and the importance of maintaining human dignity in the process. The news of what was happening spread quickly through the terminal. Charles Thomas, a senior TSA official who happened to be conducting an unannounced inspection that day, made his way to the screening room. His presence added another layer of significance to what had already become a pivotal moment in the airport's history. "Mr. Vance," Thomas began, "on behalf of the TSA, I want to express our sincere apologies for this incident." But Vance wasn't interested in apologies, he was focused on solutions. "Instead of apologies," Vance responded, "I'd like to discuss how we can prevent similar situations in the future. Not just for public figures, but for every traveler who passes through these checkpoints." The tension in the room began to transform into something more productive. Sandra Martinez, who had been taking notes throughout the encounter, found herself nodding in agreement. She'd entered the situation certain of her authority but was leaving with a valuable lesson in how true leadership operates. As the incident drew to a close, the impact was already rippling through the airport. Robert Harris, the reporter, had gathered enough material for a story that would spark national discussions about airport security protocols. Barbara Williams had witnessed a perfect example of how power and authority should be handled in modern America. Vance gathered his belongings and prepared to continue his journey, but not before leaving the security team with words that would resonate long after his departure. "The measure of a system isn't how it treats the powerful," he said, "but how it respects the dignity of every individual who passes through it." The story quickly spread beyond the airport's walls, becoming a talking point in discussions about institutional reform and leadership. But perhaps the most significant change occurred within the airport itself. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of security procedures, leading to new training protocols that emphasized the balance between security requirements and human dignity. Michael Thompson, who had initiated the secondary screening, found himself reflecting on his years of service and how often he might have crossed the line between necessary caution and unnecessary authority. Sandra Martinez used the experience to reshape her approach to supervision, incorporating lessons about humility and discernment into her leadership style. As Vance finally boarded his flight to Washington, the impact of the morning's events continued to reverberate through the terminal. Elizabeth Moore, the operations director, was already drafting a memo about procedural changes. Charles Thomas was making notes for a report that would influence TSA training programs nationwide. The incident would be remembered not for the confrontation it could have been, but for the transformation it inspired. It demonstrated how moments of potential conflict could become opportunities for positive change when handled with wisdom and grace. For those who witnessed or participated in the events of that morning, the lesson was clear: true authority doesn't need to assert itself through force or intimidation. It manifests in the ability to transform challenging situations into opportunities for growth and understanding. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone turned a confrontation into a chance for positive change? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire others to handle difficult situations with the same grace and wisdom demonstrated in this extraordinary airport encounter. As news of the incident began spreading through the airport's corridors, the situation was about to take an unexpected turn. William Martin, the airport's head of public relations, rushed through the terminal, knowing that what had started as a routine security check was rapidly evolving into a potential media crisis. The secondary screening room had become the epicenter of a growing storm. Lisa Wilson, a senior flight attendant waiting nearby, overheard fragments of heated conversations through the door. She couldn't help but notice the increasing number of airport staff gathering in the vicinity, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. Meanwhile, David Smith, a seasoned air marshal who had been observing the situation from a distance, recognized that this incident was different from the usual security proceedings. His 20 years of experience told him that the presence of so many high-ranking airport officials in one place was unprecedented for a routine screening. Inside the room, the dynamic was shifting. Richard Anderson, still reeling from the revelation of Vance's identity, attempted to regain control of the situation. "Mr. Vance, we have procedures that must be followed, regardless of who." But before he could finish, Margaret Johnson, the airport's chief legal counsel, entered the room, her expression grave. "Richard, we need to discuss this immediately," Johnson interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of legal implications. She had just finished reviewing the security footage of the initial encounter and recognized several procedural violations that could expose the airport to serious scrutiny. The tension in the room was palpable as Christopher Brown, a veteran TSA supervisor who had just arrived from another terminal, took in the scene. He had trained many of the agents involved and could see the situation spiraling beyond standard protocols. Outside, the number of onlookers continued to grow. Karen Davis, a travel blogger with a substantial following, had already begun documenting the incident on her phone. Her presence would later prove crucial in how the story was shared with the public. Joseph Robinson, a civil rights attorney waiting for his flight, observed the unfolding events with professional interest. He had handled similar cases of security overreach and recognized the potential implications of this incident for future policy discussions. Back in the screening room, Vance maintained his composed demeanor, but his words carried increasing weight. "What concerns me most," he began, "is not the inconvenience to me, but what this reveals about our system's fundamental approach to security and civil liberties." Sarah Taylor, a junior TSA agent who had been recording the proceedings, found her hand trembling slightly as she documented Vance's statement. The gravity of his words and their potential impact on airport security protocols wasn't lost on her. The situation took another turn when Thomas Lee, the airport's head of employee training, arrived with a thick manual of security procedures. His presence added another layer of scrutiny to the already complex situation. "We need to review exactly how this escalated," he announced, his voice steady but concerned. Michael Miller, a senior airport board member who happened to be passing through, was quickly briefed on the situation. His immediate reaction was to contact Nancy White, the airport's liaison with federal authorities. This incident had the potential to affect airports nationwide. In the terminal, the regular flow of travelers had begun to slow as people noticed the unusual activity around the security checkpoint. Patricia Jones, a gate agent at a nearby counter, found herself fielding questions from increasingly curious passengers. The story was taking on a life of its own. Sandra Williams, a local news producer who had been tipped off by a source within the airport, arrived with her team, positioning themselves strategically near the security area. The incident was about to become more than just an airport security issue. It was evolving into a national conversation about power, authority, and civil rights. Inside the screening room, Vance seized the opportunity to address the broader implications. "This moment," he continued, "reflects a larger issue in how we balance security with individual rights. Every person who passes through these checkpoints deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their status." Jennifer Thompson, the airport's chief of staff, arrived with a stack of incident reports from the past 6 months. Her presence indicated that this was no longer just about today's events, It was about systemic issues that had been building over time. The atmosphere in the room shifted as Mark Wilson, a human resources director, began taking notes about potential training requirements that would need to be implemented. The incident was rapidly transforming from a security check into a catalyst for institutional change. Barbara Garcia, a passenger rights advocate who had been alerted to the situation, arrived at the terminal. Her presence added another perspective to the unfolding drama, as she had long campaigned for more transparent security procedures at airports nationwide. The tension reached a new level when Elizabeth Martinez, the regional TSA director, called in via speakerphone. Her voice filled the room as she requested a full briefing on the situation. The local incident was now catching the attention of federal authorities. As the various officials huddled in different corners of the room, Vance remained seated, observing the chaos his presence had inadvertently unleashed. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the increasing anxiety of those around him. Robert Taylor, the airport's chief of security training, began reviewing body camera footage from the initial encounter. Each frame revealed more details about how standard procedures had been misapplied, turning a routine check into a potential crisis. Outside, Karen Lopez, a civil liberties monitor who frequently observed airport security procedures, had begun taking detailed notes. Her report would later become crucial in discussions about reforming airport security protocols. The situation took another turn when John Anderson, a member of the airport's oversight committee, arrived with questions about compliance with federal guidelines. His presence indicated that the incident would have repercussions beyond just security procedures. Mary Thompson, a passenger service coordinator, found herself managing an increasingly restless crowd of delayed travelers. The impact of the incident was beginning to affect the airport's regular operations, adding another layer of complexity to the situation. Inside the room, Vance finally stood up, his movement drawing all eyes. "Perhaps," he suggested, "we should focus on how this incident can lead to positive change rather than attempting to justify what's already occurred." His words seemed to break through the tension. Sandra Martinez, who had been one of the first to question him, found herself nodding in agreement. The focus was shifting from damage control to constructive reform. William Moore, the airport's training coordinator, had already begun drafting new guidelines based on the morning's events. This incident would become a case study in future security training sessions. The story continued to evolve as Lisa Perez, a social media manager for the airport, monitored the growing online discussion about the incident. What had started as a local security issue was becoming a trending topic in discussions about civil rights and institutional authority. James Martinez, a customer service manager, began organizing a team to handle the influx of media inquiries that were already beginning to pour in. The airport's response to this incident would be crucial in maintaining public trust. As the morning wore on, the impact of the incident rippled through various departments. Richard Wilson, the airport's compliance officer, began a thorough review of security protocols, while Nancy Brown, a public relations specialist, prepared statements for the press. The incident had become a turning point, not just for the airport but for discussions about security procedures nationwide. What had started as a routine security check had evolved into a moment that would influence policy decisions and training protocols for years to come. Have you ever witnessed a moment when a challenging situation became an opportunity for positive change? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story could inspire others to find constructive solutions in difficult circumstances. The situation at Cincinnati/Northern Kentucky International Airport was about to reveal an even deeper layer of complexity. As Anthony Thomas, the airport's systems administrator, began reviewing the security footage, he discovered something that would change the entire narrative of the morning's events. The security cameras had captured more than just the initial confrontation. They had recorded a series of decisions and actions in the hours leading up to Vance's arrival that suggested this wasn't simply a random security check. Daniel Clark, a cybersecurity specialist, noticed unusual patterns in how Vance's information had been flagged in the system. Margaret Martin, the airport's risk assessment coordinator, arrived with a thick folder of documents. Her face showed concern as she whispered something to Elizabeth White, the terminal operations manager. The two women exchanged knowing looks before requesting an immediate meeting with the airport's senior staff. In the main terminal, Charles Rodriguez watched the unfolding drama with particular interest. As a former federal investigator, he recognized the signs of something larger at play. The way the security team had handled the situation seemed too coordinated to be merely procedural. Sarah Davis, who worked in the airport's technology department, had been quietly monitoring the morning's digital communications. She noticed an unusual spike in internal messages just before Vance's arrival, suggesting that someone might have been tracking his movements even before he reached the security checkpoint. The revelation began to unfold when Matthew Wilson, the airport's head of internal affairs, received an urgent message on his secure line. His expression darkened as he read the contents, immediately requesting a private meeting with Linda Robinson, the airport's executive director. Inside the secondary screening room, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to something more complex. James Thompson, a senior security analyst, began connecting dots that had previously seemed unrelated. The morning's events were starting to look less like an overzealous security check and more like a coordinated action. Patricia Taylor, who managed the airport's security clearance systems, discovered that someone had accessed Vance's travel information hours before his arrival. The access hadn't come from the usual security channels, raising red flags about potential surveillance overreach. The situation took another turn when Susan Moore, a federal compliance officer, arrived unannounced. Her presence suggested that higher authorities were already aware of what was unfolding at the airport. She immediately requested access to all security logs from the past 24 hours. David Williams, the airport's head of emergency management, began mobilizing his team, not for a security threat, but for what was quickly becoming a serious administrative and potentially legal crisis. The implications of targeted surveillance of a public figure were enormous. In the terminal, Karen Thompson, a passenger rights advocate, had begun documenting testimonies from witnesses. Her recordings would later prove crucial in understanding how the events had unfolded from multiple perspectives. Michael Lewis, a senior TSA coordinator, discovered that several security protocols had been modified in the system just days before. The changes seemed specifically designed to flag certain types of travelers, particularly those with government clearances. The story deepened when Robert Harris, the local reporter, received an anonymous tip suggesting that similar incidents had occurred at other airports across the country. The implications were staggering. This might not be an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern. Sandra Lee, the airport's communications director, found herself facing an increasingly complex narrative to manage. What had initially seemed like a straightforward security incident was evolving into a story about surveillance, privacy, and the limits of security protocols. Jennifer Clark, who had been analyzing the morning's security footage, noticed something peculiar. The cameras in certain areas had been adjusted hours before Vance's arrival, suggesting premeditation in how the incident would be documented. The tension in the room reached a new level when Joseph Moore, a federal aviation security specialist, arrived with questions about recent changes to the airport's screening procedures. His investigation suggested that someone had been testing the system's capabilities for tracking specific individuals. William Gonzalez, the airport's chief of operations, called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. The implications of what they were discovering could affect airport security procedures nationwide. This was no longer just about one incident, it was about the entire system. Mark Thomas, who supervised the airport's data security, began uncovering evidence of unauthorized access to passenger information databases. The breach hadn't come from outside hackers but from within the airport's own security infrastructure. Lisa Miller, a civil rights attorney who happened to be at the airport, recognized the legal implications of what was unfolding. She began documenting everything she observed, knowing this incident could become a landmark case in privacy rights. The situation took another turn when Christopher Anderson, the airport's emergency response coordinator, received alerts about similar security incidents at other airports involving high-profile travelers. A pattern was emerging that suggested a coordinated effort to test and potentially exploit security protocols. Nancy Ramirez, who managed the airport's security training programs, began reviewing recent changes to screening procedures. She discovered that several key protocols had been quietly modified without proper authorization or documentation. As Vance observed the growing complexity of the situation, his initial concerns about individual rights and dignity expanded into questions about systematic surveillance and privacy. His presence had inadvertently exposed vulnerabilities in the entire airport security system. Barbara Williams, the retired judge, watched as the incident transformed from a simple security check into what could become a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate about privacy rights and security measures. Her judicial experience told her this case would have far-reaching implications. Richard Lewis, the airport's head of passenger services, began receiving reports from other airports about similar security irregularities. The incident was no longer isolated to Cincinnati. It was part of a larger story about surveillance and civil liberties. The morning's events had exposed a complex web of security protocols and potential overreach. Sarah Wilson, an IT security specialist, discovered that the changes to the system went beyond just the Cincinnati airport, suggesting a coordinated effort to enhance surveillance capabilities without public oversight. As federal authorities began arriving at the airport, the focus shifted from the individual incident to its broader implications. Matthew Harris, a senior federal investigator, started questioning staff about recent changes to security procedures and who had authorized them. The story had evolved far beyond a simple case of mistaken identity or overzealous security. It had become a revelation about how airport security systems could be used to track and potentially target specific individuals, raising serious questions about privacy and civil liberties. Have you ever experienced a situation where what seemed simple at first revealed itself to be part of something much larger? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective could help others understand the importance of questioning systems and standing up for individual rights. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the airport terminal windows, the full impact of the morning's events began to crystallize. Thomas Sanchez, the newly appointed federal oversight coordinator, entered the airport's main conference room where key figures had gathered to address the revelations of the past few hours. The atmosphere was tense as Margaret Thomas, the airport's chief ethics officer, presented her preliminary findings. The unauthorized surveillance program hadn't just targeted Vance. It was part of a larger initiative to monitor selected travelers without proper oversight or authorization. Karen Williams, who headed the airport's privacy compliance team, revealed documentation showing how the enhanced screening protocols had been implemented gradually over the past 6 months. Each small change had seemed innocent enough in isolation, but together they formed a comprehensive surveillance system. Joseph Rodriguez, a senior staff member from the Department of Homeland Security, listened intently as the details emerged. His presence underscored the national security implications of what had been uncovered at Cincinnati's airport. The story took another turn when Sandra Johnson, a data privacy expert, presented her analysis of the airport's security logs. The patterns she discovered suggested that dozens of other public figures had been subjected to similar enhanced screening procedures without their knowledge. Charles Thompson, the airport's head of legislative affairs, began outlining the potential legal ramifications. The unauthorized surveillance program had potentially violated multiple federal regulations and constitutional protections. As the implications became clear, Linda Hernandez, the airport's community relations director, started developing a strategy to rebuild public trust. The airport would need to be completely transparent about what had happened and what steps would be taken to prevent future abuses. Michael Thompson, the TSA agent who had initially flagged Vance, sat quietly in the corner of the room. His face showed the weight of realizing how his actions, though following what he believed were proper protocols, had been part of a larger system of surveillance overreach. Betty Anderson, a civil liberties advocate who had been called in to consult, emphasized the importance of using this incident as a catalyst for systemic change. Her experience in similar cases provided valuable insight into how institutions could reform while maintaining necessary security measures. The situation reached a critical point when William Martin arrived with breaking news. Similar surveillance programs had been discovered at 3 other major airports. The story was about to become national headlines, and Cincinnati would be ground zero for the ensuing debate about privacy versus security. J.D. Vance, who had remained at the airport to see the situation through, listened as Nancy Brown, a constitutional law expert, explained the broader implications of what had been uncovered. His morning delay had evolved into a watershed moment for airport security reform. Mark Wilson, the airport systems architect, began presenting a comprehensive plan to rebuild the security protocols from the ground up. The new system would prioritize both effective security measures and transparent oversight. Jennifer Lee, who managed the airport's public relations, worked with Sarah Davis to craft a statement that would address the public's concerns while maintaining the airport's commitment to security. The message needed to acknowledge the failures while outlining concrete steps for reform. The resolution began to take shape as Richard Sanchez, the Federal Aviation Security Director, announced immediate changes to screening protocols nationwide. The incident had exposed vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed at every major airport in the country. Barbara Garcia, representing a passenger rights organization, collaborated with airport officials to develop new guidelines that would protect both security interests and individual privacy. Her experience in balancing these competing interests proved invaluable. The afternoon brought another significant development when Elizabeth Miller, the airport's legal counsel, presented a framework for a new oversight committee. This independent body would monitor security procedures and ensure compliance with privacy regulations. David Lewis, a technology ethics specialist, began working with the airport's IT team to implement new safeguards against unauthorized surveillance. The enhanced security measures would include regular audits and transparent reporting mechanisms. In the main terminal, Sandra Martinez watched as new notices were posted informing travelers of their rights and the airport's commitment to protecting privacy while maintaining security. The changes were already being implemented, even as the investigation continued. Matthew Robinson, who headed the airport's training department, started developing new programs to educate security personnel about the balance between vigilance and respect for civil liberties. The incident would become a case study in proper security procedures. The story took on additional significance when Lisa Wilson, a federal civil rights investigator, arrived to examine how the unauthorized surveillance program had been implemented without triggering existing oversight mechanisms. Her findings would influence security policies at airports across the nation. As the day progressed, James Martinez, the airport's community outreach coordinator, began organizing public forums to discuss the changes and rebuild trust with regular travelers. Transparency would be key to moving forward from this incident. The resolution phase brought together various stakeholders to ensure comprehensive reform. Patricia Thomas, an expert in organizational change, helped develop a roadmap for implementing new procedures while maintaining efficient security operations. John Thompson, representing the Airport Workers Union, ensured that the new protocols would protect both passengers' rights and security personnel's ability to perform their duties effectively. The changes would need to work at every level of airport operations. The incident's impact continued to expand as Karen Davis coordinated with other airports to share lessons learned and best practices. The changes implemented in Cincinnati would serve as a model for airports nationwide. As the day drew to a close, Robert Wilson, the airport's chief of staff, convened a final meeting to review the immediate actions taken and plan long-term reforms. The incident had transformed from a crisis into an opportunity for meaningful change. The story's conclusion brought a sense of purpose to what had begun as a routine security check. Christopher Lee, the airport's future planning director, noted how this incident would influence airport security procedures for years to come. Vance's final remarks to the assembled airport officials and security personnel emphasized the importance of maintaining both security and dignity. "What happened today," he said, "has shown us that we can and must do better in protecting both our safety and our rights." Has your experience with airport security ever made you think about the balance between safety and personal rights? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective could contribute to the ongoing discussion about how we maintain security while protecting individual privacy.